This is the best of First and Last, the podcast.
Last night, the fireworks shift back from the baseball diamond to the hardwood as the Celtics and Wizards feed our need for violence in sports. And you heard it all there. You got to keep them separated. Unfortunately, they weren't able to do that last night, or fortunately for us on the entertainment end of this. Last night, in the actual basketball game, the Wizards get back into the series, 116-89 over Boston, back in Washington. The series does shift, but that's not the story last night. It's the fisticuffs that came to blows late in the game. Kelly Oubre, sick and tired of Kelly Olynyk, the other Kelly, setting dirty screens in the game right here. Kelly Olynyk speaks his piece about the altercation. Let's take a listen.
Yeah, I was talking to the ref, turned around, he was right there.
What did he say to you, anything?
I mean, it was loud, I couldn't hear anything.
How surprised were you by the play?
By what?
By what he did?
Yeah, man, I didn't expect it.
What do you think should happen? Should he get suspended?
That's up to other people to decide.
If they asked you your opinion, what would you tell them?
It's up to them. It's their job.
Did you notice anything different about the way they played tonight? They made a big point this morning of saying they needed to be more physical. They needed to match what you guys were doing physically. Did you notice something different?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a physical game. No, they played well. They played really well. They play well at home a lot. That's what they do, and we got to be ready Sunday.
And so what you're hearing there is, I think that point was well taken, was that for the majority of the series, despite what Brad Stevens has said, which was interesting going into this game, which is that for the most part, he felt like his team had been outplayed in the majority of the quarters by the Wizards in that series. It's just that the quarters that Boston did outplay Washington were enough to win them the first two games. But what jumped off the court for me was that the Celtics looked like the tougher team of the two. They looked like they were taking it to them in a lot of the ways that Washington came back against last night, that they rebuked last night with their performance. And it sort of blew up in this moment because, let's be real, Kelly Olynyk has kind of been the poster child for all this borderline stuff. I mean, he was the guy that sent Kevin Love home early not too long ago with that shoulder injury, with a questionable hook of the shoulder there. And just in general, is probably, if we had to, I'm sure if we took a straw poll, would probably be considered the dirtiest player left in this playoff run. That just seems to be part of his game. And listen, as a former offensive lineman, I get it. That's a world we kind of lived in. It's a world I kind of operated in. So I understand it. I don't necessarily have a problem with it. There's a line like anything else that you don't want to cross. But for the most part, he's that guy that's there to get under your skin. He's there to set those chippy screens and kind of get you going. And in that second quarter, you saw Kelly Oubre come off one of those screens, caught a particularly hard shoulder in there, and he had just had enough. And it's like anything else where if you've got that guy that's consistently trying to get at anyone, if you're Kelly Olynyk, mission accomplished. Because you got one of you stayed in the game, the other different. Kelly Oubre got himself ejected from that game. Now, I don't think that'll be the end of his playoffs, despite what any announcer might have you believe. I mean, I was surprised we didn't hear someone utter the phrase, it's just a good hard playoff foul. Like you get to the playoffs and carnage just becomes much more acceptable under the guise of the playoff foul.
Is it just me, or is this vastly overrated as a huge, monstrous cheap shot?
Oh, I don't even consider it a cheap shot. I mean, they were looking at each other. You could see it. This was chest to chest. This wasn't coming from behind. And there's a ref in between that somehow managed to absorb a lot of this blow, which was impressive. But Kelly Olynyk caught one in the chest. Like, if I'm grading on the scale of the hit, great job by Kelly Oubre. Delivered the blow with his hands and the crown of his head at the same time. Solid contact, drove through, ran his feet. All great stuff, textbook drive block kind of material. But yeah, vastly a cheap shot, like sounding the alarm. I mean, we just spent the last day probably overreacting a bit too about the projectiles being thrown in baseball, and now it translates back onto the hardwood. Listen, the NBA was looking back and saying, no. We do this entertaining post-game sound. We do this wild in-game action. Not you, baseball, trying to steal our shine.
And we can agree that the 95-mile-an-hour fastball, unbelievably more dangerous than the two-handed shove.
Oh, 100%. Like this is more equivalent to the 77-mile-an-hour breaking ball that hits you in the hip.
Wasn't even a punch.
No, there was no extension, because that's what you really look for as the marker of one of the egregious NBA fights that we replay from now until the end of time. And that wasn't this. This was, for lack of better terms, there was a playoff foul. I feel like this falls under the umbrella of the playoff foul, which basically excuses almost anything under the guise that it's the postseason, and we've ratcheted up. And if you listen to John Wall and some of the other members of these teams, these are two teams that do not like each other.
I guess just two teams that really don't like each other. You know what I mean? And we have opportunity to have a series going on. They have a lead of 2-1. We're just trying to make it a series and trying to win again on Sunday to make it 2-2. But like I said, as long as guys are not out there trying to hurt each other, it comes with the game of basketball. If somebody getting fouled hard, trash talking, that's what goes on with it.
Why do you think you guys don't like each other the way you do? You don't? What's it about them?
I don't know. I can say the same thing about Atlanta a little bit. You know what I mean? I don't really know. It just depends on how it's going to go.
Isaiah Thomas, your counterpoint, sir?
I don't know. I don't like them and they don't like us. That's just what it is. Two teams competing. Whatever bad blood we've had in the season is carried over to the playoffs. But we're just competing and trying to win. And they did that today. We took care of business at home. Now we just got to try to get game 4.
We'll make that Straight Talk brought to you by Straight Talk Wireless. Best phones, best networks, half the cost. Straight Talk Wireless, nationwide coverage on America's largest and most dependable networks. So the important part that he mentioned there is Washington did, by the way, get a win. We've had both teams now holding serve on their home court so far in this series. We'll wait and see if Washington continue to capitalize on this momentum. What, if anything, does happen to Kelly Oubre going forward? But we'll throw it to you guys, 888-729-3776. Did that do it for you last night? For so many NBA fans who want to hearken back to yesteryear when the game was a more physical brand of basketball in the 80s and 90s, and you had less of that chumminess between players, less of that good-natured friendship in between the peers in this league, does seeing these two teams that genuinely seem to not like each other play out on the court interest you more than it would have otherwise?
I want to hear from the Jordan callers from yesterday.
Honestly, that's the group, right? Like
yes.
That's
same guys. Call us back.
The Venn diagram of staunch Jordan defenders and 90s physical basketball fans is basically two overlapping circles.
First and last, the podcast.
We already got some tweets coming in on the 1-800-Flowers.com Twitter feed. At ZoolanderCZ tweets in. The question is Olynyk about that life? A callback to the debate that has captivated the hearts and minds of America surrounding this Boston Celtics team since Jimmy Butler famously decreed in the first round that Marcus Smart was, in fact, not about that life. Last night, Marcus Smart's 9 points in 29 minutes, not really about that life.
Kelly Olynyk, not about that life.
You don't think?
No, man.
Kelly Olynyk seems like a guy that flirts with that life, though.
He got a solid 2-hand shove to the chest and dropped like a sack of potatoes.
That is true. Like, I feel like if you're going to be the tough guy, you can't eat it like that. Like, even in a day and age where we sell a lot of these, because I think it was a little bit of a flop by him to kind of sell up the moment. But man, if you're going to be the big guy, if you're going to be the enforcer, you got to eat that one and come back a little bit. Now, it's the smart play to do. It's the heady play for that guy that's trying to be the borderline, because he's the instigator. Like, that's what he is. He's just sitting there poking you with a stick until you finally throw a punch or something, and then he gets to sit there and laugh while you get escorted out of the stadium.
Agreed. But I would have at least liked to see him jump up and pretend like he was going to, like, do something and, like, have a teammate hold him back. You know, kind of that fake tough guy thing that people do. He didn't even give us that. He just kind of laid there.
That is true. You know what? The 07 Warriors, the Stay Ready All-Stars would frown upon the behavior displayed by Olynyk. So right now we'll rule not about that life. But clearly he's about getting other guys tossed out of the game, and mission accomplished on that one from him. We're presented by 1-800-Flowers. You can't make it to Mom's on Mother's Day. You can still deliver a smile with 1-800-Flowers.com. Right now you can order 24 multicolored roses for $24. Go to 1-800-Flowers.com/ESPN. We open it up to you guys, 888-729-3776, to see maybe Kelly Olynyk not about that life, but are you about this NBA life where things are a little more rough and tumble, like everyone claims to have wanted them to be again for so long? Let's go to Gerald in Phoenix. Gerald, You're on First and Last with Mike Golic Jr. What's going on?
Well, I appreciate you guys taking the call, and great show. Actually, yeah, I do like it. I do think it makes sports more interesting. I like the Red Sox Orioles thing going on. I mean, there's a fine line, and that's the issue right there. Is that what is what? When do we cross the line? The 77-mile-an-hour curveball to the leg. All right, fine, whatever. You hit you with a curveball. You shouldn't have gotten tossed for that. But you throw at somebody's head. That's the line in baseball that it should never be crossed. That's something that you could actually seriously hurt somebody. I do like the toughness, and like they were talking about earlier, and I think it was Fitzy, and I can't think, I'm just losing it, but a couple hours ago, they said back in the day, Charles Oakley and the Knicks against the Heat, that wasn't even a foul called. That was just a strong, it was just a strong check. That, all right, in the rule books, yeah, it's a foul, but it wasn't even called back in the day. That's when sports were more interesting. I mean, you had the bad boy Pistons. You had, you had Shaq. He was a tough guy. Back then, there was a hatred among it because, and let's be honest, players were with their teams longer, which I do think plays a role because nowadays these guys move around so much that there's really not that chance to develop that hatred.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that one, that free agency has kind of changed all this. The nature of, I just think the way players are coming up together through AAU ball, the way so many of these guys intermingle and are teammates growing up. The Olympic team is also a big part of this. These guys strike up big-time friendships now in a way that you hear about the original dream team and how competitive some of the games of one-on-one were at those practices, and it just feels different. By the way, he was referencing Freddie and Fitz, 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Eastern on ESPN Radio, where you heard that discussion before. That gets interesting to me, the idea that that's what makes X sport great. Because we did see that with baseball, and I saw Tommy Freeze Pops, who works the board on the Russillo show in the afternoons, 1 to 4 p.m. Eastern here, saying that's what makes baseball great. The self-police, because that's what last night was. That was self-policing. That was a guy seeing another guy, getting a hard screen from some guy and getting up and saying, no, like we're not having that, and going over and essentially handling his business there. And, saying that's what makes baseball great, or that's what makes the NBA great, were those moments like that in the 90s. And it's funny because those are the moments that have nothing to do with the actual sport. Like the people who argue for the current version of basketball, and you've heard NBA coaches now come out and say that there's more focus on the skill of the game now, that you're not bogged down by the drudgery of just worrying about, all right, you're going in the lane and you're just going to get hammered. There's going to be no effort to go after the ball. It's going to be all of these body checks right here that fall under the playoff foul umbrella, but aren't actually a part of the game themselves. Like that wasn't a part of the game last night in a technical sense. The beanball that goes on in Major League Baseball is completely separate from the game, and you could even throw, because we brought it up the other day, the mechanics of fighting in the NHL. Like that's not a hockey move, that's not a hockey play, but it's built into the narrative of the sport, and so we look at it as this celebrated aspect of whatever's being done. It's just that part of it's interesting to me and how we reconcile that.
Is there ever going to come a time, societally speaking, where we don't like a little bit of physical violence?
As long as we're not shown consequences for it on the other end. Like we had that caller yesterday reference that if you have someone who's seriously injured by a ball that a 95-mile-an-hour fastball that ends up rising a little high and hitting someone in the head or in the side of the face, and we really see, we got a little bit of that. Mike Stanton got jacked up by a ball a couple years ago. Now, that wasn't intentional, so there was a difference there. But if you see one of these guys intentionally throwing someone, it does serious damage, and you've got consequences on the other end, because that's been part of the blowback in the NFL now, is you see a lot of the violence that for so long made the NFL king kahuna in the United States, and now it's paired with, we've got a little bit of doubt on if what we're watching is directly leading to some of these awful things we've seen on the back end for people that guys grew up idolizing and were heroes, and it changes the game a little bit as far as how comfortable you feel watching that. We don't have that totally in the other sports yet. Let's go to John in Florida. John, you're on First and Last, Mike Golic Jr. What's going on?
I was saying to the producer when I called that you guys must be very young, and he said you were both under 30, and I probably have ingrown toenails that are older than that. Anyway,
sorry about that.
So in the 1960s, Bill Russell would completely control the glass simply by his physical presence. He wasn't a 7-footer He was under 7 feet tall, but yet he dominated Will Chamberlain in the rebound area. And then in the 1970s, and I'm a Bostonian, so I can only speak about the Boston Celtics, Dave Cowens was a physical presence in the middle. And then, you talk about the Jordan area. You got to go back further than that. There was a time where Danny Ainge and Tree Rollins would actually physically fight and roll around on the floor. And in one instance, Tree Rollins actually bit Danny Ainge. So there was not a hatred, there was a respect, but there was a battle. They went to battle. Larry, do you remember the iconic picture of Larry Bird and Dr. J holding each other's throat in the 1980 playoffs against the Sixers? And then again, that like I said to your producer, that iconic picture of Kevin McHale clotheslining Kurt Rambis as he's going to the hoop. So this was part of what they did. And again, I agree with that caller about the free agency, but it was a different culture. It was a different time. So I'll hang up and listen to your comment.
No, it certainly was. And all of those moments, the way you bring them up, they've got that glossy sort of folklore that we talked about yesterday with some of the Jordan stuff, but it's built into the narrative and the folklore and all of the tall tales of the NBA.
Hey, remember that time two guys choked each other on the court?
Yeah.
Remember that epic clothesline?
Again, not basketball, but entertaining. And that's the kind of fine line that we talk about now. And it's interesting, too, that, again, we get to the playoffs, and so much of this conversation about guys like being a little bit too chummy seems to stem from a lot of the regular season, because you get to the playoffs, and we deal with some of this every year. A little bit of back and forth, and then we just get to lump it in and call it a playoff foul. I think we need to put more things under the playoff foul envelope. How far do you have to go before it's not a playoff foul, before you've really crossed the line? Because that's what this whole conversation's about.
First and last.
Yesterday, the sneaker event of the season, the spring kicking off the summer, dropped for everyone nationwide. Hope you guys have already gone out and copped a pair. No, you didn't miss a new Jordan drop. No, there aren't more Yeezys on the market. I missed out on those last weekend. It was a rough one. Those white-on-whites are so nice. No. This is bigger than that. There's levels to the sneaker game. And yesterday, the Big Baller brand dropped their inaugural shoe, the ZO2. Still haven't quite figured out the name behind that one. Obviously, Zoe, short for Lonzo. Not sure how you get two without the first shoe. Maybe we missed the prototype ones along the way. Maybe it's a CO2 play here. I'm not really sure the connection there would be. But regardless, you had the ZO2s drop yesterday on the Big Baller brand website. You can get two models for this one now, the wet color scheme. And the main pair debuting, there's the wet color scheme that's an autographed pair that goes for a little higher price. Here, we'll listen to the price points on this.
He took over all the timelines, all the Twitter timelines, social media. If the shoe was $150, we wouldn't be talking about it. $495 is that outrageous. And if you look at what he's done, the shipping date is November 24th. Takes about 6 months to make a shoe. If you figure that out, basically what's happening is he is doing this on demand. You order the shoe, he'll make it. You don't order the shoe, he's not going to make it. So he's figured this out, and this is just part of the hype machine. And no matter what you say about LaVar Ball, this guy is really a genius marketer. And everyone says, oh, here we go with LaVar Ball. We're talking about it again. Guess what? Our metrics, Twitter metrics, Facebook metrics, you're all clicking on it. So it's not just any sort of agenda. LaVar Ball has the world at his fingertips.
And that's the truth. I mean, this was trending. I went and saw the new Guardians of the Galaxy last night. I got out of there at 10 o'clock, and it was still trending. LaVar Ball was still trending throughout all of this. He was trending for most of the day. Now, he was trending in large part because the internet was taking the shoe to task. By the way, that sound was our own Darren Ravel there breaking down the specs of these shoes and the shoes that were trending. So the main shoe starts at $495 on the Big Baller brand website. Now, it's listed on there as a range from $495 to $695 for the base shoe, and then you have the wet autograph by Lonzo Ball, a shoe that comes autographed with an LED case, I might add.
I think that's the biggest thing. Like, you get a sweet, like, lockbox. Not only do you get $1,000 shoes, but you can't ever wear them because they're in a box.
They're in a box. Makes them even more exclusive, and that's what this is all about. By the way, the wet autograph shoes go for between $995 and $1,195 if you feel so inclined. But what you heard Darren Ravel say there, and what the whole idea behind this is about creating demand with clearly a very limited supply. Like, I saw Shaq and a couple other guys go on Twitter and say, big baller brand. You know, you're not a big baller by overcharging kids for your sneakers, kids that might potentially want these shoes. LaVar Ball clapped back to everyone who threw that line of criticism at him by saying that if you can't afford it, you're not really a big baller. And so you can kind of see what he's trying to do. Is he understands, and you heard Darren say it, the release date when these would come out is until November. This is a guy who I'm sure doesn't have a lot of front-end capital on this to go at, as evidenced by how kind of whack the logo looks, like the 3 Bs. There's no creativity in any of the clothing, really. It's just slapping their label on clothes and trying to market it as some sort of elite fashion item. That's why all the T-shirts are going off for around $50. That's why you can also buy these signature slides. That's code for sandals for anyone who might be missing out on that. So don't let them try and upcharge you on sandals. But if you feel like paying a little extra for your slides, you can get the $220 pair of signature slides by Lonzo Ball, which actually, if we're being honest, are the best-looking thing that they dropped. It's the smoothest-looking one. It's the place where the logo actually looks the best. And if we're being honest about the sneaker themselves, if you put it in a vacuum and remove price, and especially understanding the limited means that I'm sure these guys are working with comparatively, not that far off from the Curry 3s that have done horrifically. They definitely look better than the Hardens. Adidas should be ashamed of themselves for the product they put out on those. But especially compared to the resource pool. Like, it's one thing for both of these things, and Adidas has killed the shoe game for this past year. I think the Hardens were a miss. But you look at these, and it's like, all right, that's not that far off for how far behind these guys are working behind the 8 ball, as far as the means behind it. And so what you can do is you can go 2 routes, because Stephon Marbury also chimed in on this and said, well, give me a call, because Stephon Marbury famously way undercharged for his sneakers in the U.S. When his partnership in the U.S. fell apart, he was already over playing in China by then. So he's like, all right, I went direct to the manufacturers. I've got relationships. I can kind of put you guys on game with this one and help you figure this out. Because there's 2 schools of thought. Is me and Dan, you and I were talking about this before the show, is, we both had Starberries growing up as a kid, and you get these shoes that are affordable for everyone, and altruistically, it's a great idea because you give these kids affordable options to wear in a footwear market where at times these shoes felt so upcharged for so long, whether it was Jordans or the otherwise, that you felt like you were putting the average kid at a real disadvantage because you all of a sudden couldn't have those things that the higher income kids could afford, and all of a sudden it creates this disparity. It creates this overly competitive market for sneakers that it's sometimes bordered on dangerous. You had kids literally dying for Jordans at times. And so that part of it felt good, but at the same time, you were saying, I had a pair of Starberries, and those felt like shoes I could go out and cut the grass in. I wasn't worried about damaging them.
Right, I used to get, in my teens, $20 a week to cut my neighbor's lawn. And so it was cut one lawn, get a pair of Starberries. But I bought the Starberries, and the next week I was cutting the lawn in the Starberries.
And so that's the fine line you toe is, it makes it affordable for everyone, but then it's also not nearly as coveted. And we've seen what happens when you can build up the brand of sneakers to the point where they become a coveted item, not just for the function that they're meant for on the basketball court, but as a sort of culture icon. And if you look at what LaVar Ball has done overall to this point, he's clearly not content with just being boxed into one area. He believes that they can create this and make it a brand on par with everything else. And so you use that price point to create the idea of exclusivity and drive up demand when you have very little supply. Now, I don't know if it's going to work because up until this point, LaVar Ball, like Darren hinted at there, has marketed this about as well as you can by playing this character. The problem is that so many people, I think, dislike this character that it's not going to work this time around. But if you get a player, I think, more a generational LeBron James type talent? Because if LeBron James wanted to split off from Nike now, I got to imagine he would have a pretty decent bit of success there because he's the personality. People are buying into him. No one's buying into Lonzo yet. He's a little more quiet. By all accounts, a nice kid, but probably isn't going to carry this on his own, at least not yet to what we've seen. And the backlash has been so strong against his dad. But he represents kind of changing of the tide, and it scares people in a lot of the ways that any agency, any degree of control from the people involved in the process, that's why kids sitting out in bowl games scared a lot of people. That's why guys not hiring agents going into the NFL scare some people, because you realize that a lot of the ancillary parts in this become a bit superfluous when the people actually putting their name and idea and their brand on the line for these products can actually control a lot more of the game than they thought possible. So it's an interesting and a scary prospect for a lot of the people that were involved in all of these industries traditionally that felt like, all right, we've got control over the situation. We've got control over these athletes. When you've got one guy who's like, no, I'm going to take control back. So we'll throw it out to you guys too. 888-729-3776. Is LaVar Ball actually got a method to all this madness, or is he still a guy that you just wish would go away? And I think I know the answer to this one. But I'm telling you, this could open the door for a lot bigger things than just LaVar Ball, but this is still a guy that I think it's ultimately going to fall short because he's not that likable. And Lonzo, while he could go on to be a great player, is still a guy we're debating if he's even going to be the first pick overall. So I don't know if he's got it like that enough to shoulder the load on all this.
First and last.
Got some tweets coming in. We were talking about some of the NBA action last night. The Celtics and the Wizards squared off. The Wizards finally got a win in the series. They bring it back 2-1 as the series had shifted to Washington 116-89. Some fireworks flying between them and the Celtics. Golden State gets another win last night, goes up 2-0 in the series against Utah, and LaVar Ball dropped the hottest sneaker of the season. All right, maybe that last one's not quite as true, but he did drop a $500 shoe, and we heard some on Twitter from you guys. At Michael Myers91 tweets in, $500 is ridiculous for a guy who hasn't played a minute yet, but LaVar Ball is like the Kardashians. There's some people that'll buy. And I think I did call LaVar Ball essentially the sports Kardashian at one point on this air not too long ago. And it's true, and it rubs a lot of people the wrong way, despite how much it's probably just born from a bit of place of jealousy. Like, we do enjoy hard work, and we appreciate people who work hard. But part of the American dream is also doing less work and getting paid more for it. And that's essentially what LaVar Ball has done here, because he's tried to flip the script leverage-wise on people. Because that's what a lot of, pretty much all of athletics is about as far as the money scheme is leverage. Because you think about what LaVar Ball is doing, it's already what we've seen LeBron James do to an extent. There was that great piece, I think it was by Pablo Torre on ESPN The Mag a while back, about how LeBron James isn't just content to be in movies or have his shoe. He wants to control more of the means of production for all those things. He wants to own a multimedia conglomerate, for lack of a better term. He wants to be on the production side of things. He wants to be calling the shots in a way that's not often afforded to athletes, and that's a small degree of what LaVar Ball is also trying to accomplish here. He wants to own production. He just doesn't want to be a part of it. He wants to be partners. He doesn't want to be played in a way that we so often see, and that's become part of what I said is the changing landscape of sports, where we see groups getting a little more leverage than they would have had otherwise. Those players sitting out in college football that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way is emblematic of what people don't want to see come in college sports, which is players getting more leverage. And that's why I've always said players aren't going to get paid ever in college, because there's very few ways I see for them to get the kind of leverage they need. But we saw it almost play out in the NFL, where you see a place that we always talk about that doesn't have guaranteed contracts. And that's not because that's legislated into the CBA or collectively bargained by anyone. It's because that's about leverage. And that's why Andrew Luck was such a unique case a while ago, and why that season where he lacerated his kidney was so big for the Colts. Because if not, you had finally the player that so many people had talked about might have had enough of that leverage built up to where he could have flipped the script and demanded the first fully guaranteed NFL contract. but we didn't get that. But the point is that's what this is all about, is having enough leverage. And LaVar Ball, I don't think, has enough leverage at this point, but that's at least what he's trying to do, is flip the script on that situation. Take a couple of your guys' calls, 888-729-3776. Let's go to Tony in New York. Tony, you're on First and Last. What's going on?
Hey, thanks for taking my call. I like what his father's doing. I don't know if he's a marketing guy, but I can see that he's using techniques. He's definitely drawing attention. I mean, you guys are talking about him. You ain't talking about me, but you're talking about him. And before he started all this, I didn't know who his father was. I mean, I barely knew about the kid, but now, everybody knows about him. So he's going to be able to monetize that. He's definitely got it to where he's commanding eyes. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but, if you're commanding eyes, you can monetize it. You can turn that into money. Don't be surprised if we don't see him on a reality show, or the family on a reality show sometime in the future. So he set himself up and his sons to make money outside of playing basketball, which is good. We may not like it, and we may not like the way he's doing it, but it's his family, it's his son, and it's not illegal. So I don't see the problem in it. I mean, I probably wouldn't have tried it that way, but hats off to him. He's thinking outside the box.
Yeah, no, Tony, we appreciate the call. And that's the interesting part of this, too, is then the father-son dynamic that plays in all of this. Because none of this happens unless Lonzo is a baller. And so far, he's checked those boxes. Now we wait and see how that translates to the NBA. But the funny part of this is for the long time, like the defenders of LaVar Ball, and I don't think there needed to be as many people going against him as there were, but the people that defended him saying, well, he's doing this for his son, like he's raised his son's profile. To me, that's a double-edged sword, because by most accounts, he seems like a quiet kid who's got certainly a degree of confidence to him, like most great players do, but he's not his dad in that sense. And people are saying, well, now we've raised his profile, we wouldn't know about him. Well, that's a double-edged sword, because now the expectation has already been raised. And it's been raised for the rest of the family, too. Like for the two younger brothers that are coming up, now there's a bigger degree of expectation for what you kind of hear are kids who aren't quite the player that Lonzo is yet. So how that affects them becomes interesting, too. But make no mistake, in all that, like that all sounds good. This is about LaVar Ball being a star.
Well, exactly. And I think what LaVar is doing is setting himself up to sort of be the media meat shield for his kids. You can say that he's raised Lonzo's profile and then thus put a lot of pressure on him, because if he doesn't go and ball out in the NBA, then we're going to be like, what was this all about? But I really think it's sort of a genius strategy in that he's marketing himself, he's marketing his brand, and I think if Lonzo struggles, the first guy we're going to go to is LaVar, not Lonzo, as media members.
That might be true, and there was a part of me that thought that in the beginning, certainly. But as time's gone on, I mean, you see it on, we were looking at LaVar Ball's Twitter page earlier, and you see one of the professionally done photos for the Big Baller brand is LaVar Ball and his three sons, and the one guy wearing the different color clothing, the different color Big Baller brand clothing, the one guy made to stick out holding the basketball is LaVar Ball.
The holding the basketball is the best part, because he's the one who doesn't play basketball.
Yeah, he's the one whose game is actually trash out of the four of those guys, despite what he would tell you. But that's the point. It's like you look at that and it's like, all right, clearly we know where the focus is supposed to go here. And that's good. I said a long time ago, LaVar Ball was going to find a way to get paid off of this. He's going to get paid. And he's going to earn it because he leveraged the situation. Now, a lot of people would have a problem with the fact that he's, in that realm, leveraging his son to an extent. But listen, that's nothing that your favorite team hasn't done to an athlete. That's nothing that your favorite brand hasn't done, is leverage the visibility and the profile of an athlete. That's nothing that colleges haven't been doing for a long time. Fan who's bought players' unmarked jersey in the bookstore. That's all about leverage. And he's just taken back some of them. People have a problem with the idea of exploiting his son, but then you debate on, is the son in on it, et cetera, all those things there, because that's the one place that it gets dicey for me is Lonzo Ball, I'm sure, is a kid like anyone else that's had dreams about the way this all goes. And we know that this has cost him an opportunity with the big sneaker brands, with the big clothing brands right now as far as endorsements. That's something that we've heard. Let's take one quick. Randy in Rhode Island. Randy, you're on First and Last. Make it quick, brother.
Hey, I think that number one, I think LaVar Ball is a person that's very easy to dislike for me. I think I look at him and I think that he is the a highlighted example of living vicariously through your kids, except like instead of other people that, maybe you grew up and you dreamed about being in the NBA or NFL or whatever. I think LaVar Ball legitimately thinks he should have been in the NBA. He legitimately thinks.
And there's no doubt about that. There's absolutely a portion of this involved in that, but he's also something we've seen plenty of times before. Like, he's your prototype AAU dad. He's not that different. He's just got a bigger stage.
First and last, the podcast.
Fight night in the NBA last night. Kelly on Kelly crime. Kelly Oubre. Heard that Kelly Olynyk was saying he couldn't afford a pair of Big Baller brand Zo2s. Said you can only afford the base model. I got the autograph copy. Called him a broke boy. Calamity ensued. Fight night in the NBA. And oh, by the way, the Wizards also won a basketball game. Golden State also won a basketball game. But we got back to some of that playoff. We got back to the playoff fouls. I want to keep expanding the playoff foul umbrella to just including like a full-scale brawl, to see like the next game just full-on fisticuffs underneath the basket and hear like Reggie Miller or someone like, oh yeah, it's just a good hard playoff foul. Like, I feel like we heard the wild overreaction on the call last night of this is the dirtiest cheap shot we've ever seen. This could be Kelly Oubre's last play in the playoffs for this year. But then on the other side, I always do love the former players. Like, any like the hardest foul imaginable, once you hit the postseason, just becomes excused as a playoff foul. It is truly amazing, and I kind of love it. So let's keep expanding the playoff foul umbrella. Let's also get back to some of you guys in the calls. Let's go to David in Boston. David, you're on first and last with Mike Golic Jr. What's going on?
Mike Golic Jr., two quick things. One of them, I want to mention a donut thing to you because I wanted to say this for you like a year. In sports, you have to be noble and you have to be gentlemen. Now, I know a lot of people will have differing opinions, but I just disagree with it. I don't think taking cheap shots and I don't think playing dirty lets you know if you could have ever beaten your opponent fair and square. I'm all against it. I'm all about not pitchers in Major League Baseball. Don't be throwing at guys' heads and behind guys' backs. Guys in the NFL, don't be trying to end a man's career by taking his knee out and causing him to have surgery and potentially career-ending surgery. And hockey with the fist fights. Have you ever seen Tiger Woods tell Phil Mickelson that he's going to stick his 4-iron where the sun don't shine? You ever seen him do that in golf? And I'm not even a huge fan of the golf game, minus like the PGA Tour. My point is, you never know if you're actually going to win a game fair and square when you bring all of these emotions to bear and guys start fighting and injuring one another or doing things that are unethical or outside the context of what we as fans expect to see in a game.
Well, David, listen, I would argue that there's a fan expectation that wants a lot of those other things, but there's also a line. Like, you're talking about two very different things. Going out there with the intent to injure and end somebody's career is a lot different than giving a guy an extra shove at the end of a play. Is a lot different than setting hard screens with a little extra oomph the way Kelly Olynyk was last night. A little bit different than a 77-mile-an-hour breaking ball to the hip.
I like that David said you don't see that in golf and then followed it up with, but I don't really watch golf.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you would.
Yeah, exactly. I don't watch this sport, but perhaps if there was a little more animosity there, because we have golf on the total other side. We're coming off the Masters weekend. I said I was a little out on sportsmanship because we just sat there and absolutely slobbered all over these guys for high-fiving after good shots and all these wonderful overt bouts of sportsmanship. But the country club sports are a little bit of a different realm. They're over kind of in a different box at this point. I would like to bring them to this box because I think a little bit of bad blood on the course is always fun. But that's a conversation for another day. But yeah, I think that last caller was talking about two very different things. Because there is that, you talk about unwritten rules and an unwritten code. There is that code, like I know in football, like you don't go after a guy's knees in that way. Like that's the stuff that's off limits. Now cutting's a different thing, but diving at the side of some guy's knees, diving at the back of some guy's knees in a way that could really seriously end someone because you understand this is how everyone's making their living. Nothing we saw last night was with the intent to injure, with the intent to maim, but it was to send a message. But also, winning in that like wonderful vacuum of sports where you don't affect your opponent's ability to compete at all. Come and live in the real world with me for a second, man. Let's go to Alex in Miami quick. Alex, you're on First and Last. Mike Golic Jr., what's going on?
Hey, guys, good morning. I'm an old-school baseball guy, so I do not mind the throwing at the batters, throwing inside. I do have a problem with going after somebody's head, like the Red Sox did against Manny. But, you know, they sometimes you got to police it. You know, I like the policing of themselves. When spikes up, he should have been plunked his next at bat, and it would have been dead right there on the spot. But unfortunately, the Red Sox kept going. But again, I like the mind game of the pitcher going inside, backing up the batter. I mean, that's fun, man. That's good stuff. That's good baseball. Just not at the head, but body. That's fine. I got no problem with it.
Chris Sale didn't throw at Manny Machado's head. Like, let's be clear. It's very common practice in baseball to throw. He threw behind him, and he missed him by about 1.5 feet.
No, it's absolutely worth knowing, but that's where a lot of people take it is, again, trying to find the line is when you start getting up into that head and neck area where serious damage can be done. But again, it's that funny point of, you heard him say, this is what's great about baseball, this is what's fun about baseball, an act that's not really anything all that baseball related. By the way, we referenced a call earlier before. I think it's worth re-racking for you guys. Talk about, on one end, you've got some of the former players on broadcast where you'll see a lot of this shoving, especially when you get into the lane underneath the basket and it all gets lumped under the umbrella of a good hard playoff foul. And then on the other side, here was a call from 98.5, the Sports Hub last night that felt a little differently about the way things went down.
Isaiah to his left and moving screen called on Kelly Olynyk, who immediately goes, oh my goodness! A vicious cheap shot thrown at Kelly Olynyk. And man, you talk about flashing back to the 80s. One of the dirtiest plays we have seen in years. Kelly Olynyk was talking to an official, and he got hammered from the backside. Was that Oubre?
Oubre.
Kelly Oubre's night is done. His playoffs may be done. My goodness, what was that young man thinking? Obviously, the answer, nothing.
Listening to that call, you would think that Kelly Oubre had pulled out a chainsaw on his way over to Kelly Olynyk. Like, you'd have actually thought he was over there just dismembering this guy on the court. My God! What are we supposed to tell the children? Shield their eyes, avert them from the screen, the humanity. My God. Is that a Big Baller Brand undershirt? What have we done? The Zotu Wets, how did he get the autographed pair out of the box? The humanity. What is he doing with the LED case? So much to figure out here. The carnage in the NBA last night. As again, oh, by the way, the Wizards get back into the series. It's 2-1 right now.
First and Last.
Tony driving into the paint, here, drop off the back of the rim, no good. Ryan Anderson with the defense rebound for the Rockets, and Parker's hurt. Tony is down. It's a 5-on-4 the other way, and Anderson gets it off to the corner. Gordon will fire a three. That shot is short. Offensive rebound, Beverly, and the Spurs foul him immediately because Tony Parker is down. Tony Parker is holding his left leg, and this place was just rocking moments ago. Now it gets very, very eerily quiet.
You heard the call there. That is the sound of one Tony Parker for the San Antonio Spurs, who was announced yesterday, ruptured the left quadricep tendon and will miss the remainder of the playoffs. It was announced on Thursday. The timeline for his return will be determined in a later date, but for all intents and purposes, he is done for this playoff run right now. And if you look at a San Antonio team that, got a much-needed win against the Houston Rockets after getting blown out on their home court in Game 1, it does come from the outside looking in, especially now in the playoffs, at a hefty price. Tony Parker been a guy during the regular season that had looked like a far cry from the player he used to be, but like a lot of these players, these stars that get up in age, that start prioritizing the postseason a little bit more, Tony Parker had, for lack of a better term, something that's become pretty popular in the postseason, flipped that switch. And had become a pretty valuable part of the Spurs lineup. And so you would assume that this would hit them pretty hard going forward, and it would be a big adjustment, especially now that they're in the middle of a pretty tough series. But our own Amin El-Hassan, NBA insider, last night on ESPN Radio, said that the Tony Parker injury will affect the series, but not quite in the way we all think.
The Spurs actually get a little bit better with Tony Parker out. Or I should say, Houston's job gets a little harder with Tony Parker out. In this sense, Tony Parker, he of advanced age, defensively, not as good, right? He's a defensive liability on the court. So now that he's off the court, you say, well, where do those minutes go? And everyone says, well, Patty Mills. And Patty Mills is not a great defender. Sure, okay, Patty Mills will play a little bit more, and he's not a great defender. But then the minutes that Patty Mills would have played are now eaten up by Jonathan Simmons, who is very athletic and a good defensive player and a high-energy guy, or even worse, more Kawhi Leonard. And so if you're Houston, it's like, yes, Tony Parker's on the game. Oh, no. Now you got these high-energy, like, great defensive guys who are taking those minutes, which would otherwise go to a subpar defender. And that kind of makes life a little bit more miserable for the Rockets. The Spurs actually get a little bit better with Tony Parker out. Or I should say, Houston's job gets a little harder with Tony Parker out. In this sense, Tony Parker, he of advanced age, defensively, not as good, right? He's a defensive liability.
So there you have it. Amin Elhassan pointing out, I think, more of the defensive aspect of Tony Parker here coming into question, because he had been a guy over the course of this playoffs that was certainly giving you offensive output, and on his best day every once in a while will flash that speed that made him such a threat going to the lane for so long in the NBA. Like, we talk about John Wall and LeBron James and Russell Westbrook and all these guys, and rightly so for their athleticism. But as far as that guy that could turn it on, especially in the half court going towards the basket, Tony Parker was a blur for a very long time and still flashes some of that and that ability to finish creatively around the rim. But to Amin's point, defensively, it had become different. Now, you would dispute if they were really going to be that much better with him off the court against Houston, why wasn't there more of that already from a guy in Greg Popovich, who I understand might have some degree of loyalty to his tenured players there, but is also a basketball coach, a smart basketball coach that we all laud for that going away. Why would he not be cognizant of that and understand that and make more of those changes accordingly? That being said, it can do unique. There's two ways this can go, because I've always said injuries matter more so in the timing rather than the severity. Because if you have a severe injury to someone on your team early enough in the season, you can adjust. If you've got an injury that occurs to someone right before the postseason that starts, and you're used to playing with that person in your lineup, and you're used to playing with that rotation set based on where that guy is in your lineup and the style of play that goes through that, it makes it a little more difficult. That's what worried. I mean, we were a few weeks removed from having that conversation about Kevin Durant coming back off his injury right before the postseason got started, of could Kevin Durant be the one thing that derailed this Golden State Warriors team? A Golden State Warriors team that's up 2-0 in that series against Utah right now, won 115-104 last night, and has looked every bit of dominant, so much so that they're kind of a non-story at this point because they're holding serve in the way we all thought possible. They continue to look like that dominant team that might not get challenged through this playoff run, but that was the conversation because of the timing of Kevin Durant's injury and the return. And so now with Tony Parker, this can go one of two ways. Is yes, this had been a guy you'd come to rely on a little bit more through this postseason run, so how do you make that adjustment? But could also go the other way, where it does in the way, now remember, again, that same Golden State Warriors team a year ago when Steph was out and sitting out due to injury in the playoffs, force some of your other parts to take on a little more of a role. It's kind of like that idea with your body where you remove one sense and the other senses get stronger. We saw Draymond Green fill that role in a big, big way for Golden State when Steph was out. And now with Tony Parker out, does Kawhi Leonard, like Amin hinted at there, all of a sudden say, all right, put that on me? In a way he's already demonstrated as possible. We saw him do that in the last game. We saw him do that in the Memphis series in a couple of those really compelling games where he flashed that top-tier talent that's made him an MVP candidate, a very viable one, finally breaking him out of that defensive player of the year box that we had been so content to leave him in. So if that does happen, that is stock up for the Spurs. Now, I would dispute that the defensive addition is such a marked improvement, or else we probably would have seen more of that. But regardless, an interesting perspective and an interesting look at a series that now takes a decided turn because one of those parts is out. It is even at one apiece, and now it shifts back to Houston. So we'll see if the Rockets can recover, because on the other side, you had James Harden really look like he tapped out of that game pretty early. And he's the guy, you talk about importance to that team. Yeah, you want more Kawhi Leonard. You need more of James Harden because he makes everything go there. Yeah, Lou Williams Eric Gordon. They've got some other guys that can ball handle when he's off the court, but we know who drives that ship. And we know who drove the ship for Washington the other night, coming back and getting a much-needed win in that series. John Wall getting back to looking like the best point guard in the Eastern Conference, going up against Isaiah Thomas, who had just wowed us with his 53 performance. Just 3 of 8 shooting for him the other night, a really low offensive output. Had another incident with the tooth, actually. I had to go back in the locker room and have their medical staff reinsert that tooth that had become a problem for him during this series in a big way. So as sort of folklore-ish as that tooth has become in all of this, and Isaiah Thomas's postseason has felt transcendent because of all of the things that he has overcome, that's a very real thing to pay attention to. And it's a very real thing that's having an effect on the game. Mike and Mike, coming up in the 9 o'clock hour this morning, we take you up till Mike and Mike as we do every day, Monday through Friday. They're 6 to 10 a.m. Eastern. They're going to have Isaiah Thomas, the Basketball Hall of Famer, not the current Boston Celtic, on later in the morning. We can see if he maybe agrees. How does this injury to Tony Parker affect the Spurs? Does it actually help them like Amin Al-Hassan does, or does it put them behind the 8 ball against a team that we talked about the other day is built a lot like Golden State, a lot like Cleveland in the way they're going to attack you? And boy, they can bury you if you're not careful, if you don't have the offensive horses to keep up with them.
Thank you for listening to the First and Last podcast. You can listen and subscribe to all ESPN podcasts in the Listen tab of the ESPN app. First and Last.